Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Skeleton Crew. I'm your host, Jen Callahan, and tonight I have a great guest with me. Her name is Marcelene Forbus, and she is a radiologic technologist turned radiology practitioner assistant. And she is also, too, a podcast host of her own podcast called Collaboration RA. So I feel very honored that I have a other podcast cohort with me tonight. Thank you so much, Marcelene, for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Always happy to support another podcast and then, of course, collaborate together. So the more we can get out there about the industry, the better we are.
I agree. I agree totally. So I've had a few different people on the show who are rad assistants. So it's always interesting to get more information about this profession because it's not widely talked about. And to be honest, I feel like not up until like the past few years did I even really know that it even existed personally myself. And I feel kind of silly because I've been in the profession myself for over 10 years at this point. So let's first start talking about you a little bit. Can you tell us, where did you decide that you wanted to transition from being a rad tech and then, pursue your way into this? And maybe even how did you even hear about the profession?
I was a technologist. I think I had been out of school for about 2 or 3 years. And my radiologist had approached me because I did a lot of fluoroscopy with them. And so I caught on really quickly. Asked me to go back to school to become a mid-level for them. They were very non-specific. They kind of just used that term mid-level. And my boss actually came up to me and said, "Why don't you become a radiology practitioner assistant?" And kind of told me a little bit more about it and that it was an advancement of our X-ray background. So I kind of considered it. A lot of people were really pushing me towards it in our department. And my grandfather had gotten sick and had had open heart surgery and ended up with toxic megacolon. And our radiologist had spent a lot of time with us doing image review. I mean, if you're an old seasoned tech, you know that we used to be the stat. We didn't have anything. We were hanging films. So whenever I was visiting my grandpa and they had done the x-ray, I saw it and it was late in the evening and I knew that that was an emergency. I let the technologist know and said, somebody's got to look at this. This is emergent. Unfortunately, it just wasn't caught fast enough and I lost my grandpa. And so I remember thinking to myself, I want to be able to empower technologists to be able to understand sometimes what we see on imaging and understanding the difference between emergent situations and non-emergent, and not necessarily to empower them, to go on to a mid-level, but to be able to know what they're looking at and have an in-depth understanding that there's more than just pushing the button, which I think a lot of us have that common knowledge. But I think some of us don't get that training. And especially now, our radiologists don't really have the time to train technologists like what we used to see. So that was what had me pursue it. And that was about 17 years ago. And I haven't looked back since. And I absolutely love this career.
It's a very sad story. I'm very sorry to hear about the way that your grandfather passed away, but it led you down a good path of where you currently are. And you're right about, as a technologist, being able to look at images. I mean, looking at images can be difficult. You can see a broken bone sometimes easily, sometimes not so easily, but looking at things like abdomen images and even chest x-rays, you think that they might be cut and dry, but they're really not. And at this point, I don't really feel like there are very many radiologists out there who are like, come sit in my office with me and I'll explain this to you, because there's shortages everywhere. Radiologists are bogged down with so many different exams that they're reading and doing readings on. And then as a technologist yourself, you're very busy in your department. Probably if you're in a hospital, bouncing between like fluoro and portables and inpatients, and totally understand everything that you said there. So you decided that you wanted to progress forward with your career there. And I've heard that there's not many schools in the United States that do RA. It's a master's, correct? Is that what you end up getting?
It is, yeah. So you start out with your bachelor's and then you progress through the program. And when you graduate, you do graduate with your master's.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So did you have a hard time finding a school for yourself to go to?
Currently, at the time that I went, it was only Weber State that's open. Right now, we have 6 programs. We have North Chapel Hill, we have Weber State University in Ogden, Utah, we have Midwestern State University here in Texas, you have Rutgers, you have Loma Linda, and then I'm missing one.
There's Quinnipiac, I know.
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
I know that one just because 2 gentlemen that I've spoken to recently both went to Quinnipiac.
Yeah, so there's 6 of them that offer it. And like I said, usually to get into the programs, you have to, in 2025, it's going to be 2 years minimum that you've been in the industry working as a technologist. Usually you have to have a 3.0 GPA. And then, of course, you have to have your bachelor's to enter the program. And then having a hospital agreement. So I always tell everybody there's affiliate agreements. You have to have an affiliate agreement between your radiologist and you, the hospital and you, and the university and you. And then the university needs one between the radiologist and you. So I always tell everybody that sometimes can be the most challenging part is seeing who's going to take on a student. And sometimes it takes a little bit of elbow grease and really, explaining what it is that we do because a lot of people don't know what we do. And a lot of us are trying to get out there and educate about it, which is probably why either your listeners or yourself have been hearing more about it because we've been advocating more for ourselves.
It is kind of a quieter profession, I guess. I was looking on the Collaboration RA website, and I like at the very bottom, it shows by state how many RAs are in each state, I guess, currently practicing or registered. And I mean, some states only have one RA, which is crazy. I mean, there's some states that have a good amount. I had written down Texas, Florida, and Pennsylvania. I think Texas was the highest one. But yeah, some states having one, maybe two. And it's interesting because you guys seem really useful. You make a big difference in the department in terms of helping out the radiologists and the things that they are in charge of, but could have someone else help them with and lessen their load, to be honest, I guess. So
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
it's kind of interesting that it's not more popular or that there's not more programs out there for this.
So one thing that I tell everybody in a lot of the most recent discussions that we've had is you guys have to remember radiology is such a small unit, right? It's not like other extenders that go out and they do all this broad spectrum within medicine. They go through family practice and they go through internal medicine and they go through all this, extensive part. Now, our education is actually very similar. We take a lot of the same coursework. And then on top of that, we do our radiology coursework. And so on the JVIR, there's actually an article that has a comparison side by side of PA and PNRA. And you'll see there's striking similarities. The main difference is ours is all radiology based. And so you have to have those preceptorships and you have to have that. And so you can't put as many of us out there as what you typically would for those that go through all those other aspects of medicine because we're designed for radiology. And so when we stress that our numbers are not going to grow to the numbers that you see other individuals out there, and that's the reason for that.
Okay.
And so we'll always be smaller in numbers.
So you went to your program and that was located in Texas, correct?
The program I went to was in Utah. So I flew back and forth from Texas to Utah because you visit your campuses.
So you have to do the clinical work after, I guess you do the didactic?
It depends on the program. So the one that I went to, it was a mixture of both. I worked full time. So I would do 8 hours of my day unpaid and 8 hours of my day paid. I did that 5 days a week. And then I had weekends off to study for like 17 hours a day. And then I think it's like every 5 weeks to 6 weeks, I would fly to Utah and do my didactic there. And now we still did didactic at home, but it was kind of this hybrid didactic. Whenever I would go to the university, that's when you would be taking some of your tests and, presenting and case studies. And it was pretty rigorous.
Okay.
Education's pretty phenomenal.
It's interesting how you said that you weren't doing class and clinical like hand in hand. Say, for instance, like when you went through your rad tech program, I feel like 3 days a week you were in classroom, and the other 2 days you're at your clinical site. And then if you went through a 2-year program, you flip flop that way. So it's interesting that you go, you learn, you take your test, come out, I guess, do hands on, then go back. It's an interesting dynamic there.
It took some getting used to, but you get through it, just like anything else. I mean, I think for the most part, you kind of think to yourself, like, what in the world did I sign up for? But then once you're done and you get to do the work, I love this career. Absolutely love it.
The other RAs that I've spoken to in the past have, shared with me the different avenues of the path that you can go down in terms of how you're going to practice. One gentleman I spoke to primarily worked in interventional radiology. Another gentleman kind of fluoro and IR and, a bunch of different procedures. Where do you find yourself in the realm of that? Or how do you currently practice?
I do a mixture of both, but my primary is back in IR. I do some of the IR procedures. I do like paras, thoras, thyroid FNAs, or some of the superficial lymph node core biopsies. Some of those more basic procedures, G-tube exchanges, things like that.
Mhm.
But a lot of what I do is decision fatigue for my radiologist. And so they really love me for that. We've had extensive talks about it here recently, but basically, whenever we get an order, and like I said, we're high volume, but a lot of times I can sit back there. Well, actually, I stay back there all the time. So I don't know why I said a lot of times. They get the freedom to be able to go back to the reading room and they can read, some of the more routine studies or even catch up on the interventional studies that they've performed.
Mhm.
And then what I do is whenever we get an order, I'm able to look at, does the patient have prior imaging? What is their lab work? Are they on blood thinners? I work them up with our nursing staff. That way, whenever I go to present them every case that we have, they're not having to go through and make some of these thought processes. I'm able to streamline it for them and kind of hand them a package that says, hey, here's everything that we have. This was when our imaging was performed. Patient doesn't have anything. They were transferred here. They're asking us to do a biopsy. We have no imaging. I check the chart. There's no disc. What study would you recommend? Then I speak with the care team and then so forth and so on. One of the other interesting things is that our physician to physician communication went way up by the implementation of the RA. And some of the things that it went way up is now our radiologists are having time to have these discussions with these physicians because now that I've condensed everything down for them and you've taken a good 10, 15 minutes from their time having to look up these cases and go through all this backhand stuff, they have that time to visit with the physicians. And so all the way around, it's just made things easier for them. They're able to do these more high-end cases while I'm in the background working up the next patient or consenting or visiting with family. And it's not that they don't still get to do those things, but I've been able to answer a lot of questions that maybe didn't have to be filtered through them that even us as technologists could do. And so now they get to focus on the core questions or even just explaining this is the process that you're going to go through today. Our patients love it. So it's
Mhm.
been really good. And a lot of our physicians, our referring physicians, they know if they communicate with me, they will get a call back from our doctor. So if it's something that's not emergent, not trauma, and even our trauma team does actually communicate with me, but they'll give me a call and say, hey, Marcelene, I've got this patient upstairs. This is what I'm looking for. I can ask them, what all have we worked up? Have we done an H&H on the patient? Have we done this? And then as soon as I give it to my radiologist, they know my radiologist is going to call them back. I think that that's pretty awesome and pretty unique and just kind of the way that we have our setup. I can't speak for everybody else, but
Mhm.
it's made us really successful. And so it's really appreciated on all parts, my part, their part. So it's a good team effort. And our technologists love it.
This episode is brought to you by xraytech.org, the RadTech career resource. If you're considering a career in radiology, check out xraytech.org to get honest information on schools, degree options, career paths, and salaries. So there are challenges, though, with every profession, and especially in the RA world. Can you share a little bit of the challenges that you guys face in your profession?
I think for us, and much like most of radiology, is recognition. I think that the RAs did a really good job at just kind of sitting back and thinking that we were progressing in a direction that we really weren't. And so, in hindsight, you kind of figure out like, okay, wait a second, we're not moving where we thought we were. And all of us kind of coming together and collectively saying, let's educate a little bit better about who we are. Obviously, recognition is one of the things that we're seeking with CMS and some of the other societies, and those are always ongoing discussions. Things are progressing in a very positive direction. A lot of times there's things that not everybody sees, and even me, that I'm not privy to, that our societies work towards. And I think we're definitely moving in a more positive direction. And, I'm pretty hopeful that some of the more recent conversations are going to reflect that same positivity that everybody will see soon.
I did want to ask about, you had mentioned CMS, and for our listeners, if you're not sure what that acronym stands for, it's Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It's all on the website as well, and you just mentioned it about being recognized by them. What does that exactly mean for the profession? And I guess maybe for if you are practicing within a hospital, does that have something to do with in terms of reimbursement for the hospital for procedures? Okay.
Reimbursement. So a lot of people get confused with CMS and being able to perform procedures. And those are two totally different things. The performance of procedures is done through your credentialing. And what that means is whenever you've gone through the education, you're able to go to a hospital and either say we have state licensure or we don't. You don't have to have state licensure. but you can go and show that you have the education, the clinical know-how, and that they've vetted through. CMS for hospitals does give bylaws that all hospitals have to follow, that individuals are fit to be working within the categories that they're applying, right?
Mhm.
So whenever you do get credentialed at a hospital, the hospital has done its due diligence to make sure that, yes, they are putting somebody who's educated and knowledgeable. That's procedural side. Then you have the billing side, and that's where CMS comes in. CMS can also determine your supervision levels to get reimbursed. It doesn't mean that you have to perform the procedures that way at a hospital level if you're not billing, if that makes sense. And so there's all these different components to it that gets really sticky and involved. And if anybody's really interested in that, happy to walk them through it. But what we are seeking is that CMS does recognize us as an entity or as an extender to our radiologist, where our radiologists get paid for the procedures that we perform. And so we're not there yet. I think that positively that's the direction that we're moving. We currently don't have what we call MARCA, Medicare Access to Radiology Care Act legislation that we've put in the past. We don't have that as of currently, but I'm hopeful that, we're on the horizon of seeing that come forward. And hopefully this time we can get it passed, because it's been 13, 14 years in the making, I think, at least since 2012, I believe, that we've been working towards that. And again, I think it's just been better educating. I think we've realized that.
Speaking of educating, you've been quite busy. You had shared with me before we started recording that you've been here, there, and everywhere talking about the profession, which is great, that you're getting out there and sharing your love of the profession and doing some lecturing. Can you share a little bit about that? Like, who are you going and speaking for? And you said that you're going to be going across the pond to London soon. So
Yeah, that's the plan. Not 100% sure if that one's going to pan out. I know that I was invited and I accepted, and we'll see. But yes, I have been lecturing. It started out as a state level. I love to give CEUs, just recognition of our profession. Our societies do a phenomenal job, and I just champion their processes. But yeah, I've been lecturing. It started out, local, and then it moved to state level here in Texas. And then it moved to other states like Louisiana. And then I just got done doing one in California while I was actually in Las Vegas for our professional society. And I lectured at AVIR, and I'm going to lecture at the AHRA. The other one that I'm looking to do, and like I said, don't hold me to it, the BSIR is a goal of mine, and had that invite. And so we'll see if that one pans through. But moving from that state to national to international has been pretty phenomenal. That was not a goal of mine this year, but it sprouted itself, and so I'm just going to go with it.
that's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Even if for some reason it doesn't pan out, to receive the invitation alone, I feel like is recognition for yourself and all what you're doing. So at these conferences, do you pick different topics that you're talking about, or do they suggest things that you talk about, or are you mainly talking about the profession?
It depends. One, I cater to the audience, so everybody in Texas has heard it. We do what's called the RA 101, where we teach technologists what it takes to become an RA and how do you go that avenue and who we are. A lot of RAs are giving those on every state level. And so then the other one that I do is I want to make it relevant. I want people to be able to get their CEUs. So I kind of pick topics that are going to pique their interest. And a lot of times I ask, what are a majority of your people that are coming? Are they CT techs? Are they mammographers? Who are they, and how can I interact with them? I like to keep it more RA focused, obviously, because that's the line of work that I'm in. So at AVIR, we did more about how we work within the radiology or interventional radiology setting, and how can we relate that to the technologists so that they can better understand my role, so that I can show them who we are and that this is an avenue for them as well too. It's kind of different at the AHRA. That's where we have a lot of our leadership. And so it's going to be about boots on the ground. How does the RA contribute to our leadership? Because that's huge too. We're with their staff all the time when they don't necessarily get that opportunity. I'm on the floor pretty much my entire shift. There's things that we see that take place that we're able to bring back to our leadership and fine tune things and really build that team. And so how do you tap into that? Well, here's how we do it at my facility. Just educating them on that. And so, kind of catering to who is it we're speaking to, and how do I play a role that's important and pertinent to them.
Another great thing that you're doing, as I mentioned earlier, that you are also to a podcast host, which is great. And your co-host Reese is also to an RA. How did you guys meet?
So Reese was working with me. We work at one of the same facilities, and he was fairly new. And at the time, the RAs were just really hitting this kind of lull where we were trying to figure out how do we educate about ourselves. And I made a joke and said, I'm going to start a podcast. And Reese is like, great, let's do it. And I was like, that was a joke. And Reese is like, nope, we're going to do it. And surprisingly enough, I work with a radiologist. His name is Dr. Aaron Fritz, and he runs the Back Table podcast for IR. And I didn't know he did a podcast. And I was like, hey, I don't even listen to podcasts. And he's like, oh my gosh, let me help you. I have to pay a lot of credit and kudos to him because he kind of helped us out and he's really pushed us. And he's been a great advocate for the RA and actually spoke with us at the AVIR. And I mean, phenomenal physician and just as phenomenal a person. So I guess God's just put me in the right path everywhere that I ended up, whether I wanted to be there or not.
But you and Reese have been doing the podcast now for a little bit, almost like 2 years, I think,
I think
right?
we're on 3.
3.
We're celebrating 3. Yeah, we just started our 3rd year.
And I'm sure you never thought that you'd be 3 years in.
Hair got grayer. That's what it does to you. So watch out.
On your podcast, any notable people that you've had on that you'd like to highlight possibly, or any notable conversations that you can think of?
Man, we've had so many amazing ones. We got to visit with the ASRT CEO, Melissa Pergola, and Brandon Smith, the president of the ASRT. We've had Dave Hardwick, who's the president of the SRPE. Jason Barrett, he really set forth a lot of these advocacy efforts with the RA. We've had Terry Licciardi on, who's chair of the CBRPA. I mean, just a lot of conversations. We've had our radiologist on. I really can't pick one because every single person brings something unique and individual. And if you really just listen to them, like you and I were talking earlier, there's key aspects that you can really relate to. So those have definitely been a highlight. One of my favorite things about the podcast, and it's at the beginning of my slide at every single CEU lecture I do, is all the different ways that we can advance in radiology. And so every single person, like we visited with the AHRA, and being able to have the certified radiology administrator, not even know that that's an avenue for us, on top of everything else I'm currently studying for that. So there's just so many things. And so everybody brings something new that I'm like, oh my gosh, we can do that. Radiology has really just put ourselves in a box and tied a little bow on it. And we got to open that package up because there's just so many ways we can advance.
I agree. And I feel like the knowledge isn't really shared enough. I mean, at least in like your initial education in terms of like, say, like graduating from like a rad tech program, I feel like you kind of go to school and maybe now in programs that you said in Texas talk about being an RA. But I feel like the main things talked about are, just progressing from one modality to another. They don't really talk about what's beyond that. What other professions in radiology can you get into? So, I mean, I think that's great that you share that knowledge. People find themselves 10, 15 years in, either one working in X-ray or two have progressed on to another modality, but there's something else that they want to do, but they still want to stay within the field. And they might do a Google search because everyone Googles, right?
Yep.
And you're not going to really come up with information like that. Or you go and try to apply to another job. And like you said, you're kind of put in a box, a little bow, and you're a rad tech, and they see that you've worked in a hospital and kind of like, where can I go? So I love that you share knowledge of what else you can do in the world of radiology.
I should probably post it on our website.
You should.
That way people can look.
Yeah.
The seminars bring amazing things. I think it's just, like I said, thinking outside of ourselves, but also at the same time, self-recognition. Radiology lacks that. Us as individuals, we kind of do this whole, I feel like we're disrespected, and it's kind of like, okay, but you speak what you get, right? What you were saying, what you put out there is what you're going to receive. And I think it's time for us to kind of transition from that. And I'm guilty of it too. Transition from that and say, no, I'm a worthy profession. I am respected. And let me tell you why. And start defending ourselves instead of still dwelling on that where we were at.
So speaking of that, going from where we're at then, where do you think that the RA profession might be in, say, like the next 10 years? What are your hopes and dreams for it?
To be honest with you, I think if you would have asked me this question even 3 years ago, probably couldn't give you as well of an answer. But just in the past 2 years, getting to see the conversations change from a more negative one where we faced a lot more opposition to now we're getting a lot more support, not only from the technologists and other RAs themselves, but also radiologists, and starting to see the value in the work that we do, and those that work with us now feeling like they can speak more towards what it is that we actually do. And so you're seeing this shift from more of a negative aspect to truly understanding who we are. And that comes from honest, transparent conversations, which I think we should have had years ago, but here we are today. I think progressing and looking at 10 years down the line where I would like to see us, I mean, of course, I can't see the future, but I hope that we do have that recognition, and I think that we will. And I think that, a lot of people are going to see similar to the anesthesia assistant, where they just got their recognition and they've been doing it for 50 years, but we're very alike to them. And so I see us progressing that way, where we're still working under the supervision of a radiologist, but we're able to have the services that we're currently performing, having our radiologists be able to bill for them. And so I think that's the key factor.
I do want to bring up this one thing before we sign off. So in the RA profession, there are two different roles. So you were a radiology practitioner assistant, correct? But then there also too is the radiologist assistant. Is there a difference between the two?
Difference is governing bodies. So you have the Radiology Practitioner Assistant, or RPA, that has the governing body of the Certifying Board of Radiology Practitioner Assistants. Then you have the RRA, which is the Registered Radiologist Assistant that the ARRT is over and credentials, right? Many years ago, we decided to all kind of come together and collaborate together. And so about in 2010, we all took on the common name Radiologist Assistant. All of us follow kind of the same scope of practice. When your state law puts it in, we all adhere to the same rules and things like that. And so I always tell people, don't let the two names confuse you. You can have a dual certification. There are radiologist assistant programs, like we said, 6 of them. We all kind of follow the same rules. And so the older generation, so it's myself, and then we got our newer generations that come in. And so I tell everybody, don't get hung up on that. It's confusing. We've made it confusing. We get that. And that was where we came together in 2010.
That's good. I was a little confused before we started talking, this evening, wondering that. But I mean, it makes total sense that you guys are just forming into one. All right. Well, thank you, Marcelene, so much for chatting with me tonight. I really enjoyed our conversation and giving more information about this wonderful profession that's out there for anyone who's looking to advance their career. So I really appreciate it.
Yep. And always happy to support if you ever need anything or you ever want to come on our podcast.
I'd love to.
So always happy to have you.
All right. Everybody, I'm Jen Callahan, and my guest with me this evening, Marcelene Forbus, sharing with us about the radiology assistant profession out there. So keep your ears out. And if you ever see anything, I guess, petition-wise, in terms for the CMS and for them to be recognized, pay attention to it because it's really important for the radiology world. So, all right, everybody, we'll see you later. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Skeleton Crew, brought to you by xraytech.org. On the next episode, join us to explore the present and the future of the rad tech career in the field of radiology.